A very good evening, dear student. Today I will be discussing a Canadian woman writer, Alice Munro. In the current time, we are witnessing the rise and popularity of Canadian literature. Thanks to some women writers like Margaret Atwood, Alice Munro, Sharon Pollock, and also some male writers like George Raika. So they have written some masterpiece. Because of that, the new Canadian literature is becoming popular around the world. And Margaret Atwood and Alice Munro, these two are Nobel Prize winner also. So today I will be discussing a short story by Alice Munro, The Love of a Good Woman. So, Alice Munro is considered as a master of complex narrative. She has displayed this quality in most of her stories. Her short story, The Love of a Good Woman, is one such story that challenges the conventional notion of story structure by using the technique like discontinuity, layering, diversion, or incompleteness, and so on. Actually, she is considered as a suspense writer. In most of her stories, there is an open ending, means she leaves the end for the reader to decide. So one can one cannot imagine the real ending. There can be two, three, four ending of one story. So, so The Love of a Good Woman is perhaps one of the most important short story written by Munro because of unique narrative style, which creates suspense and reader are compelled to think about the story again and again. The open ending of the story also forces reader to think many possible options. As I've told earlier, there is not one ending. I mean, she gives reader many possible options. So it is one of her most complex story because it has a layered narrative structure. In The Love of Good Woman, she excels in the skill of keeping it all together. That has become one of the characteristic of her art. Critics from across the world have grappled with the story and since its publication, and it is especially the ending that continue to puzzle and amaze reader because readers are not able to decide the ending of this story. The story begins in a museum of a small Canadian town, Ontario, where an instrument box of an optometrist is displayed with a note. This book dash has considerable local significance since it belonged to Mr. D.M. Villan, who was drowned in the Peregrine River in 1951. It escaped the catastrophe and was found presumably by the anonymous donor who dispatched it to be feature of our collection. So this was written on the box. For reader, the story present a challenge as there are multiple character narrators and the temporal sequence and casual relation are highly complex. There are many sections of this story and each section has a narrator. The Love of a Good Woman is a complex treatment of secret in a small Canadian town. In this respect, it is typically Munro because this has been her topic in her story collection one after the other. See, Munro is considered as a writer who show her region, especially small Canadian town. The only difference is about the story from all her other stories that it is divided into four sections, as I have just said. And these four sections are: the first section is Jutland, the second is heart failure, the third is mistake, and the fourth is lies. The first section of the story, Jutland, is told in omniscient voice from the perspective of three boys who discover villains in his car which was submerged in the local river. Now, this Mr. Villain is a doctor. He's an eye doctor, and his car, he was drowned. He's supposed to be drowned in the river, and his body and other things are found. Car and other things are found by the local boys. They don't, but they don't report it to anyone. Uh, uh, But after some time, one of the boys told it to his mother, and then the police discovered it. Now, here the first section ends. Then the second section is the heart failure, which gives a lengthy diversion to an isolated farmhouse in which the local practical nurse Annette is tending, Mrs. Janet Quinn, a terminally ill mother of two children. Now, the first story is completely different, and the second story is completely different. The section focuses on Annette's character and her increasing interest toward her patient's husband Rupert, because the fact is that Mrs. Quinn is about to die. There is no mention of Mr. Villain in this section, neither the incident of the discovery of his body by the boys. This creates suspense in the minds of reader. So reader become confused that the first section is different and the second section is different. So what is the thing which associate these two section? Is there, what is the connectivity between these two section? But we find this in the third section. The disclosure is done in section 3, when on the deathbed Mrs. Quinn, the third section, which is mistake. In this section, Mrs. Quinn is on the deathbed and she confesses that her husband has killed Mr. Villain because he was trying to take advantage of her. Means, as an eye doctor, she has called Mr. Villain to her house, and he tried to sexually exploit her or molest her. And when her husband came, he saw Mr. Villain touching her wife in an appropriate way. So he got angry and he pushed him. There was a fight between them, and this is how he was killed. She also confesses that she gave him idea to push Mr. Villain and his car in the river and help him in its execution. With this, the third section ends, and the fourth section lies, which is the last section of the story. Mrs. Quinn dies, and Annette is in dilemma. The nurse Annette, who is supposed to be the good woman in the story, she is in the dilemma whether the person whom she loves is murderer or not, because it is only her wife, his wife. It is only his wife, Mrs. Quinn, who has told this story, whether it is a confession or it is just a story make up by her. She is confused. She, being a good woman, believes that if Rupert, which is Mr. Quinn, is a murderer, then he should surrender himself to the police. However, she will go to the trial every day and wait for him until he returns. But she is also not sure whether the story narrated by Mrs. Quinn is true or false, not. Because maybe Mrs. Quinn must have realized that she is likes her husband, so she, being possessive of her husband, must have made this story so that Annette should not take interest in her husband. Means this is just a possibility. I'm not sure about it. So Annette makes a plan to test Rupert, but it is Munroe style that she doesn't gives a clear picture as to what happened in the end. There is open ending in the story, and reader never know whether Rupert killed Mr. Villain or whether he will kill Annette because she knows her his secret, because Annette knows his secret, or whether they will become lover and live happily together like it is in every story. It is up to the reader to decide the ending. So in this way, there are many possibility or many option which Munroe has given to this story, ending of the story. The Love of a Good Woman is in fact a gothic novel, or in other words, a detective puzzle, which is difficult to solve, which only Alice Munro can solve. Thank you. I hope you have understood the story.